Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here. It is the 29th day of October. Glad to have you join us here this morning. It is a wet one here in the middle part of the country. More cats and dogs raining out here at the moment. And of course, we've had plenty of rain over the last week, so I can only imagine it's going to add to some flash flooding around these parts. But we got an interesting show lined up for you here today. We'll get through the oil markets, what's going on there. Talk a little bit about Apple and Amazon as they reported their earnings yesterday. Talk a little bit more about shipping and supply lines, things of that nature. And we're going to talk some burgers here this morning as well. A couple interesting articles in regards to that and a couple other odds and ends. So stick around. I'll be right back. Hey everybody, Spectre here. Want to tell you about my Teespring store that I just opened up with a handful of products in that for you guys, the listeners, the audience, those that are in chat on a day in, day out basis. Always appreciate your support, and I figured what the heck, we'll throw some merch out there for you guys. And so obviously with YouTube and Nerd Shenanigans as of late, I'm going to be looking to expand to other platforms, and well, that all comes at a cost, so I figured what the heck. That being said, I got some t-shirts and that out here. You can see those in black, white, and gray. Spectre Does News. Got a water tumbler, 20 ounce there. Got a coffee mug you can get in black or white. And of course, we got the Let's Go Brandon #FJB shirt, which you can also find in black, white, or gray. Right now, you can find that all over at https specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. That's https://specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. Thank you for your support. All right. As I mentioned, right into it we go. Futures slide, dragged lower by Amazon and Apple. Of course, I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that here in just a moment. It says U.S. equity futures fell along the European and Asian stocks on Friday after tech giants Amazon and Apple and Starbucks sank in pre-market trading after their earnings missed expectations, signaling a possible drop of around $180 billion in combined market value when the U.S. reopens. While dizzying bond market gyrations sparked by surprise central bank announcements amid concerns over inflation and monetary tightening left investors scrambling to guess what happens next. A failure by Biden and the Dems to pass their massive Build Back Better stimulus package added to the bearish sentiment. 7:15 a.m. Eastern, Dow E-minis were down 45 points or 0.12%. S&P 500 E-minis were down 22 points or 0.5%, and NASDAQ 100 E-minis were down 138 points or 0.88%. 10-year yields rose 3 basis points to 1.61%, and the dollar rose while Bitcoin was flat at just a hefty 61,000. So here we see the print of E-mini futures net here this morning. It says disappointment on Apple and Amazon results will likely weigh on the market sentiment, said Ipek Ozkardaskaya, senior analyst at Swissquote. And there is little to improve the mood, as Joe Biden is still struggling to pass his mega spending bill. The COVID Delta Plus cases are surging, and the U.S. growth fell short of expectations in the latest read. There was some relief out of China, where some Evergrande Group bondholders are said to receive an overdue interest payment shortly before the expiry of a grace period, buying more time for the debt-stricken property developer as it tries to raise cash through asset sales. Separately, Joe Biden was dealt a setback on Thursday as the House of Reps abandoned plans for a vote on an infrastructure bill, with progressives seeking more time to reconsider his call for a separate $1.75 trillion plan for social initiatives. Frankly, if they tank them all, I think America would be much happier. Here are some of the biggest U.S. movers today. Apple slides 3.6% in U.S. pre-market trading after the iPhone maker reported disappointing fourth quarter results and warned about the impact of chip shortages, rekindling worries about the key holiday quarter. Amazon slumps 5% in pre-market trading after its forecast for holiday sales fell short of analyst estimates, signaling the pandemic's boost to online shopping continues to fade. Metamaterials up 2.9% in pre-market trading after soaring as much as 32% Thursday post-market, as investors mistook it for Facebook Inc. following the internet giant's rebrand. Oh, isn't that just dandy? So yeah, apparently Facebook obviously having rebranded themselves as Meta. Apparently some people must have got their stock ticker confused and dumped a bunch of money into not Facebook. Western Digital shares dropped 10% in pre-market trading after its earnings forecast missed estimates. U.S. Steel surges 8% in pre-market trading as investors cheer a stock buyback and a hike in dividends. Starbucks shares decline as much as 4.9% in U.S. pre-market trading as the $20 billion in new payouts to shareholders failed to offset quarterly results that fell short of expectations. B. Riley Financial gained in Thursday late trading after announcing a $4 dividend composed of a $3 special one-time payout and a doubling of its regular quarterly dividend to $1. DaVita Inc. fell 6.7% in after-hours trading after cutting the top end of its forecast for 2021 adjusted earnings per share from continuing operations. Plantronics tumbled 12% post-market after the headset maker reported second quarter revenue that missed its own guidance, as well as analyst estimates. A10 Networks shares rose 7.5% in extended trading on Thursday after the computer networking products company said it's confident in accelerating growth beyond the previous targets of 6 to 8%. Also, Tailwind 2 shares rose 4.9% Thursday post-market after Terran Orbital Corp., a builder of small satellites, said it is merging with the SPAC and plans to go public in the first quarter of 2022. So here we see some Australian 2.75% of April 2024 bond yield, and we talked a little bit about that yesterday, what kind of shook up the markets by way of bonds and the fact that they're not going to keep the caps on them by way of yields, and off they go. Currently trending toward the 0.7 range. Says in Treasury futures, multiple block trades shortly after 6 a.m. Eastern were consistent with a curve steepening wager. Yields were cheaper by 2 to 3 basis points across the curve. All right, skip through that here. Get down to the old snapshot. S&P 500 futures down 0.4% to 45.67 even. Stocks Europe 600 down 0.5% to 472 and change. Brent futures up 0.2% at 84.49 a barrel. Gold spot down 0.3% to 1793.54 per ounce. U.S. dollar index up 0.14% to 93.48. The Nikkei up 0.3% to 28,892 and change. Shanghai Composite up also 0.8% to 35.47 and change. And that looks like that'll do it for that. Aside of that, we've got some overnight news out of Bloomberg here. Says the returns on carry trades are roaring back in the currency markets of the world's major developed countries, thanks to surging commodity prices, low volatility, and the growing ranks of central banks that are tightening monetary policy. UK households are under increasing financial stress just as the Bank of England contemplates weaning the nation off near-zero interest rates, according to debt collection firm Lowell. China's junk dollar bonds had their steepest two-month decline in a decade as stress builds in the battered real estate sector and defaults mount to a record. France and Italy drove economic growth in the 19-nation euro area in the third quarter following the suspension of most COVID-19 curbs. A surge in consumer spending propelled French output to 3% in the 3 months through September, exceeding all but one estimate in a Bloomberg survey. Italy reported an expansion of 2.6% that was bolstered by industry and services. As the prospect of interest rate hikes whipsaws bond markets, bears can be forgiven for betting the recent 10-year Treasury sell-off will resume in earnest given the inflationary pressures building everywhere. But with a key section of the U.S. yield curve inverting on growth fears, the likes of AXA Investment Managers to HSBC Holdings plc can find a receptive audience to make a case that the 40-year bull market is alive and well. So bottom line, to infinity and beyond, right? The market will never go down. And of course, out of news squawk, still in Asia, Taiwan growth slows in third quarter despite record exports. Asia stocks set for third day of losses as tech and financials fall. Taiwan third quarter GDP expands 3.8% year over year, survey estimate of 4.3%. Malaysia unveils biggest budget to spur post-lockdown recovery. And back over to Europe, NatWest shares fall as margin pressures overshadow profit surge. Agnelis agreed to sell Partner Re to Covea for $9 billion. So a little merger and acquisitions going on. Euro area economy bolstered by France, Italy growth, GDP update, and Telenet falls as HSB cuts to hold on drastic strategy. And it looks like pretty skinny on the old event calendar here this morning. 8:30 a.m. We got September personal income estimate at down 0.3%. Prior was a 0.2. Personal spending estimate of 0.6 versus a prior 0.8. Also at 8:30, September PCE deflator year over year estimate of 4.4 versus a 4.3. PCE deflator month over month estimate of 0.3 versus a 0.4. September PCE core deflator year over year estimate of 3.7 versus a 3.6 prior. Core deflator month over month estimate of 0.2 versus a prior 0.3. 9:45 a.m. this morning we got October M&I Chicago PMI estimate of 63.5. Prior was a 64.7. At 10 a.m. October University of Michigan sentiment estimate of 71.4 versus a 71.4 prior. Current conditions estimate of 77.9 versus a 77.9, and expectations even at 67.2. Also out of October, University of Michigan 5 to 10 year inflation. Prior was a 2.8%. October University of Michigan 1 year inflation estimate of 4.8 versus a prior 4.8. So that's a quick run through of what is going on in the old marketplace here this morning. Some movers and shakers. Outside of that, we had some earnings releases yesterday. As mentioned, we're going to get to Amazon and Apple here and how they fared. Today, Exxon, we've got Chevron, we've got ConocoPhillips and that, to name a few. So heavy on the energy stocks, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, especially given that now with Europe and China and India and a number of these countries and continents, rather, and places all across the world are suffering major energy shortages. Are these guys going to be on the bankroll for that? We'll have to see. All right, so Amazon tumbles after missing revenues and earnings, guiding far below consensus. Says with the bulk of the FAAMG stocks, which is now Gamma, following Facebook's rebranding to Meta, reporting solid results, investors were keenly looking to Amazon earnings, where the biggest question for Amazon is how sustainable are the growth trends that boosted its performance during the pandemic. The internet giant was one of the biggest beneficiaries of shifts in consumer and business behavior last year while continuing to grab market share in cloud. And it seems to be the main theme of all of these big tech stocks, as we reported here the other day with Google and Facebook both. Big shift to cloud computing and that, and I guess that's going to be the trend going forward. Many consumers flocked to buy things online as they wanted to avoid infection at physical stores, with the recent Delta wave scare likely providing a further boost to Amazon. Further, Amazon Web Services revenues soared on the back of rising usage from Internet digital services, including remote working software, video streaming, and gaming. But the wider availability of vaccines, and as employees start to return to physical offices, the risk is some of those trends may start to reverse. Investors will also be looking for any commentary on the future prospects for regs and antitrust legislation. Well, gee, I wonder why that would be. It's not like Europe and the US and AGs across the states net have any problems with these big tech monopolies at all. So, with that in mind, how did Amazon do in Andy Jesse's second quarter as the company's new CEO? Not good. Not only did the company miss on the top and bottom line and operating income, but guided much lower than Wall Street expected. So all but one of these were a beat, or all but one of these were a miss, rather. Says net sales 110.8 billion, up 15.3% year over year, but missing the estimate of 111.81 billion. Earnings per share was also a miss at 612, down big from 1237 year over year, missing the estimates of 896. Operating income 4.85 billion, down 22% year over year. Estimate was a 5.62 billion. The Amazon Web Services net sales 16.11 billion, up 39% and beating the estimate of 15.4 billion. Online stores net sales 49.94 billion, up 3.3% and missing estimates of 51.53 billion. Looking ahead, the company's guidance was unexpectedly ugly, with the high end of expectations missing sell-side consensus as the company sees several $billion in additional costs in the fourth quarter. Q4 net sales 130 billion, flat to 140 billion, missing Wall Street estimate of 141.62. Quarter 4 operating income between 0 and 3 billion, also badly missing estimates of 7.44 billion. So, in a nutshell, not looking good for Amazon, albeit the perhaps glimmer of hope is in web services. And it says a breakdown of sales in third quarter between domestic and international shows misses in both. North America net sales was 65.56 billion, missing the estimate of 66.36 billion. International net sales was 29.15 billion, missing the estimate of 29.42. So profit margins were also down, looking like, what is that, about 4.4%, looks like, on the graph. And of course, Amazon operating margin by segment, there's the breakdown of that. I think we'll forego getting into the rest of that. Amazon obviously majorly up on employees, still looking for folks. And of course, we've talked a little bit about what happened with their HR department. And the question was asked at the end of that article, where are they going to find the bodies if they can't even find folks to go to the old warehouses for distributing goods? So, interesting question. So outside of Amazon, let's take a look at Apple. Apple plunges after first revenue miss in 4 years, warns of $6 billion in supply constraints. I guess you might as well just read that as, oh, well, they're going to be affected by the chip shortages just like everybody else. Says moments after a very ugly quarter from Amazon, which missed on the top and bottom line and guided far lower than consensus, investors held on to hope that at least the world's largest company, Apple, would somehow pull a rabbit out of its magic hat of tricks and report solid earnings, pulling the Nasdaq out of its after-hours slump. Alas, it did not, and after reporting a miss on the top line and matching the earnings per share, Apple is also tumbling after hours and dragging Nasdaq futures down with it. Here are the ugly details from the just concluded quarter 4. Their revenue 83.36 billion, missing estimate of 84.69 billion. This was the first revenue miss since 2017. Earnings per share $1.24, matching its estimate of $1.24. Quarter 4 iPhone revenue 38.87 billion, missing estimate of 41.6 billion. Quarter 4 iPad revenue 8.25 billion, beating estimate of 7.16 billion. Quarter 4 Mac revenue 9.18 billion, missing estimate of 9.31, which nonetheless was an all-time high. Quarter 4 products revenue 65.08 billion, missing estimate of 68.72. Service revenue 18.28 billion, missing estimate of 17.57, which was also an all-time high. Wearables, home and accessories 8.79 billion, missing an estimate of 9.28 billion. And there's their earnings snapshot there. And it says, unlike pre-COVID times, Apple once again did not give guidance for the coming quarter. While the market appears to have become accustomed to this, but given the fact that most other tech companies have continued to offer an outlook, some are wondering when will investors call them out on this. In any case, investors will surely demand some guidance about quarter 1, given the issues in quarter 4. Right now, nearly every major Apple product is weeks or a month plus away from shipping. It's not a good situation right now. Commenting on a quarter, Apple Chief Financial Officer Luca Mastri said that we fully expect to set a new December quarter record for revenue, but cautioned that we also expect the supply constraints will be greater than the $6 billion. We expect most of our product categories to be constrained during the December quarter. So iPhone, iPad, Mac, and wearable sales in millions. There we see kind of that seesawing around there. And Apple Services revenue obviously is still tracking upwards here. Apple Services revenue growth year over year, a little bit of a drop in that from the previous quarter. And it says, summarizing revenue growth by segment. Total revenue grew 29% year over year. iPhone sales were up 47%. The Mac was up 1.6%. iPad was up 21%. Wearables up 11.5%. And services up 25.6%. And a little bit of a breakdown by sales region. Americas, looks like Greater China and that seems to be leading the way there. Europe, Japan, rest of Asia, PAC, etc. And Apple sales by geographic region, I guess, bar graph. So, bottom line, not necessarily a very good quarter for Apple. Obviously constrained by the chip shortages like pretty much everybody else. And we'll have to see how that fares moving forward. All right, so outside of the tech stocks net, back to shipping. Shipping fear catastrophic fallout from crazy California port fees. That's out of FreightWaves. Says the cure is worse than the disease, say critics of an emergency plan of the ports of LA and Long Beach backed by the Biden admin. If you think port congestion is bad now, just wait for what comes next. On Wednesday, 2 days after the ports of LA and Long Beach announced a surprise emergency fee for containers lingering too long at terminals, the National Shippers Advisory Council held its inaugural meeting. The NSAC, created to advise the Federal Maritime Commission, is composed of 12 U.S. importers and 12 exporters. Members include heavy hitters like Amazon, Walmart, Target, Office Depot, and IKEA. Council members had a lot to say about the California port fees. None of it good. It says, I think it will be catastrophic. Starting November 1st, the ports of LA and Long Beach will charge $100 per container for boxes dwelling 9 or more days that move by truck, and those dwelling 6 days or more that move by rail. The fee will increase $100 every day. It will be charged to carriers, which will then almost certainly pass the fee along to shippers, meaning it will be the equivalent of an escalating demurrage charge. As far as the hyper demurrage announced in Los Angeles, Long Beach, I think will be catastrophic, said Rich Roche, Vice President of International Transportation at Mohawk Global Logistics, during the NSAC meeting. So cumulative charges per container per day after deadline, again highlighting the charges of $100 a day, increasing $100 per day, and by day 30, charges reach $46,500 per container. Yeah. So is there an incentive? Well, who is really the culprit here in the logjam? Chassis are already in short supply, and this will artificially suck out the rest of the containers that may be sitting in there at terminals that didn't need to be on a chassis, and now they're going to be parked somewhere. It's probably going to wipe out whatever's left in terms of chassis, predicted Roche. According to Steve Hughes, representing the Motor Equipment and Manufacturing Association, I'm concerned that this new fee is going to cause even more problems than it's going to solve. I understand the logic behind it, and it makes some sense. But, unfortunately, because we don't have the throughput at the front gate, I think this can cause us more problems than we already have. Bob Connor, Executive Vice President of Global Transportation at Mallory Alexander International Logistics, said, this absolutely came out of left field. I don't see this charge doing anything but adding more cost, and freight rates being what they are, this is the last thing we need. Both Connor and Roche urged that someone in government step in and put the brakes on this. Haven't we heard that before? Somebody say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. The government is not the savior, they are the problem. Carriers to pass along fees to shippers. NSAC members speaking during Wednesday's meeting emphasized that the LA Long Beach charges will ultimately be paid by shippers. Daniel Miller, global container lead at Cargill, dubbed California's emergency charges crazy fees and said, "We know this is all going to come back to us. I had a couple calls with carriers yesterday, and they've already admitted that yes, they are going to come back to us." Rick DeMaio, Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Operations for Office Depot, said, "All fines and fees flow to us, to the beneficial cargo owner." According to Ken O'Brien, President of Gemini Shippers Group, what was done this week at the ports of LA and Long Beach is effectively an indirect tax on the American consumer. Connor reported, "When we heard about the new charge, we immediately reached out to some of our contacts at the FMC. From the conversation we had, it was pretty obvious that the FMC was not forewarned that this thing was coming." So, flash forward to the bottom here. Carriers' demurrage and detention fees have faced heavy criticism over the past year. They are a focus of FMC regulators as well as proposed legislation to reform the Ocean Shipping Act. And yet, the LA Long Beach plan, with the explicit blessing of the Biden admin, will have the same effect as demurrage. Northdurft said in his online post, "It's ironic that the international community has been pleading to the government about the absurdity of demurrage/detention charges, only to have said government administer more of the same." So, yeah, guess who's going to be paying for that? We are, the consumer. Do you honestly believe that at the end of the day, we're not going to feel the effects of that? So, what is the solution? Well, I've got an interesting article on that I didn't bring forward here today, but one might surmise that perhaps it has a little bit to do with this little scamdemic we've been dealing with called COVID, and the fact that we paid people to sit on their couches, and, all the other mandates that came along with it. Lift all those things, voila! I would just about bet that all this stuff goes away. So, still talking containers and cargo here. The Coast Guard says 100 containers fell off a cargo ship, some carrying Christmas decorations and toys. The Canadian Coast Guard released an update on the number of truck-sized intermodal shipping containers that fell into the Pacific Ocean from a container ship during rough seas last week to more than 100, up from the original estimate of about 40. The Maltese-flagged Zim Kingston container ship hauled 2,000 containers with 1,000 on deck when stormy seas near Vancouver Island on October 22nd knocked 106 containers into the ocean. After the incident, two of the containers containing hazardous chemicals caught fire. The fire has since been extinguished, and the vessel is anchored at Constance Bay in the Straits of Juan de Fuca off of Victoria, British Columbia. And of course, we covered that story here at the front part of the week. It says it is possible that some containers may wash up on the beach late this afternoon. Due to the hazardous contents of some of the containers, members of the public are advised to avoid opening or moving them and calling 1-800-889-8852 immediately. It says with the fire under control, the Zim Kingston crew were able to safely access the container bays on the ship. They now believe that 106 containers went overboard, not 40. The number of containers with the hazardous goods, 2, has not changed. So, some of the contents lost at sea include car parts, industrial parts, and machines, Christmas decorations, clothing, toys, sofas, poker tables, and other everyday items. There are reports that some of the containers have washed ashore. And apparently here is at least one of those. It says we located 4 Zim Kingston containers on shore near Cape Scott today. The containers have now been identified, referenced against the ship manifest, and do not contain hazardous chemicals. And yet here's another one. The Atlantic Raven continues to support operations at the Zim Kingston today with emergency tow and firefighting capacity if needed. Firefighters continue to work on the ship, and onshore air quality monitoring continues to show no impacts. So, a majority of the containers sunk. They're out there being battered in heavy seas, says Mariah McCooey, Canadian Coast Guard Deputy Federal Incident Commander. the watertight integrity is not that great. The incident comes as global supply chains are more snarled than ever, forcing container ships to stack containers to the brim in a technique called containerization. The more containers loaded up on a vessel, the more prone it becomes to an accident at sea in adverse weather conditions. And that's precisely what happened to the Zim Kingston. So, yeah, not good. So again, what is the solution to that? Do you have more runners with less containers? Do you open up other ports of entry? What's the solution there? So outside of that, as mentioned at the onset of the broadcast, talk a little bit about burgers here and where some of this is going. McDonald's hikes Big Mac prices to offset surging costs. So, McDonald's is faced with higher food and labor costs, raising menu prices at a much faster pace than historical rates, focused on preserving profits. The problem with higher priced menu items is that they will diminish the buying power of the working poor who frequent the Chicago-based burger giant. Famous for the Big Mac burger, the company is paying more for food, packaging, and other supplies, CEO Chris Kempczinski told investors Wednesday. He said commodity costs are up 3.5% to 4%, up from the 2% increase earlier this year. On top of that, labor costs are up at least 10%. Rising labor and commodity costs are pushing up menu prices in the U.S. by approximately 6% this year. Certainly, I was hoping and expecting that we were going to see the situation improve, maybe a little bit more quickly than what's materialized, Kempczinski said. Says the news of McDonald's increasing menu prices comes as the restaurant industry battles a supply chain crisis, read here and here, and labor shortage that is disrupting operations. The labor shortage issue has been widespread for the burger chain, even forcing some stores to limit hours of operation. It has become harder than ever to retain or even find workers. Earlier this year, some McDonald's franchisees offered signing bonuses and paid interviews to attract new workers. The National Owners Association, an independent, self-funded advocacy group of McDonald's franchisees, warned months ago that attracting new workers was challenging because generous unemployment benefits allowed many low-income workers to stay home and get paid more. Thank you, Nancy Antoinette, for your scraps. NOA warned also an inflationary time bomb was imminent and would be passed along to customers. Inflation is the flip side to all of these changes, NOA said. Price increases are happening everywhere you look and will continue as employers pass along these added costs. We will do the same. A Big Mac will get more expensive. Our government officials need to know what is happening out in the real world, NOA continued. They need to know that they are creating an inflationary time bomb. Raising menu prices at America's favorite fast food burger chain will only impact the working poor the hardest, who see their real wages crumble as inflation continues to run rampant through the economy. And of course, highlighting old Jerome Powell, head of the Fed. Obviously, the old transitory narrative is not faring too well, is it? No, didn't think so. So, outside of that, In-N-Out Burger has been in the news as of late for some of the shenanigans going on in California. So, top Florida official suggests In-N-Out move to Sunshine State after vaccine mandate closures. This out of Epoch Times. Florida's chief financial officer, Jimmy Petronas, suggested that In-N-Out Burger should move to the Sunshine State after several In-N-Out locations were shut down by California officials. Petronas appealed to In-N-Out CEO Lindsay Snyder to move to the state, arguing that Florida has a superior business climate, noting the state has no personal income tax, low corporate taxes, and no mandates. I'm writing you today, not only as Florida's chief financial officer, but as a small business owner who grew up in a family-owned restaurant and worked there for more than 30 years, his letter reads. I know how hard it is to turn a profit and make payroll on a good day, let alone when your own government is working to crush your business with absurd mandates. Once I heard the news of your shutdown for refusing to act as vaccine police, I knew I had to reach out immediately. It came as health officials in Contra Costa County, California, shut down another In-N-Out Burger location for allowing indoor dining without checking customers for proof of vaccination, coming after a location was closed in nearby San Francisco for a similar reason. Contra Costa County District 1 Supervisor John Goya claimed that In-N-Out staff in Pleasant Hill have just flouted the law. It was other residents who complained about them, he told ABC 7. Oh, bunch of Karens, I see. That is why the health department followed up and issued fines. The Contra Costa Environmental Health said in a news release the commercial food permit for the Pleasant Hill location was suspended Tuesday for, quote, creating a public health hazard by repeatedly violating a county health order intended to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission, end quote. Despite repeated notices of violation and fine, this business continued to permit indoor dining on site without verifying the COVID-19 vaccination status or recent negative test results of customers. The press release from Contra Costa health officials also said. The restaurant chain, which has numerous locations across the West Coast, said its staff will not check the vaccination status of customers. The reason for the closure is that In-N-Out associates were not actively demanding vaccine documentation and photo ID from each dine-in customer before serving them, In-N-Out Chief Legal Officer Arnie Wensinger said in a statement to local media after the Contra Costa location was closed. We refuse to become the vaccination police for any government, he added. It is unreasonable, invasive, and unsafe to force our restaurant associates to segregate customers into those who may be served and those who may not, whether based on the documentation they carry or any other reason. Wensinger continued to say that the chain doesn't agree with any government dictate that forces a private company to discriminate against customers who choose to patronize their business. The move comes about 2 weeks after another In-N-Out Burger in San Francisco's Fisherman Wharf was closed down for allowing indoor dining without having its staff check whether they're vaccinated or not. A vaccine passport mandate was implemented in San Francisco earlier this year by Democrat Mayor London Breed, and similar systems have been implemented in New York City, LA, New Orleans, and several other U.S. cities. The San Francisco location was reopened to outdoor dining and takeout. Some would-be customers in Pleasant Hill criticized the move to shut down the business. It's not their job. They're here to make hamburgers for us in all reality, said Sean Vance to ABC 7. Absolute government overreach. It's too much government control over us. We are a nation of freedom, said Army veteran Laura Moser. And that's exactly what is going to play out all across these lands, not just here in the United States, but we're seeing that worldwide. All these mandates, all these decrees, all these little dictates. Do you honestly think the government can really enforce that stuff without the help of the private sector? Of course not. Of course not. And so what happens when said private corporations don't follow through on their end of the bargain? Well, then you get the little dictates and that of the health boards and what have you, and that around the country, just basically coming in and saying, well, we're going to strip you of your license and shut you down. So, what is the proper move? Get rid of these people out of office. Cut them down, right? All right, so outside of that, diesel and petrol cars losing ground in the EU. We talked a little bit about this yesterday by way of what's going on with EVs, and this is kind of continuing on that theme. Car industry is one of the sectors most impacted by supply chain disruptions and global chip shortages caused by the coronavirus pandemic. However, as Statista's Florian Zant notes, this hasn't stopped it from being under scrutiny for its role in climate change, whether due to the production process or the cars manufactured. When it comes to the latter, car buyers in the European Union seem to be doing their part to lessen the impact of fossil fuel-powered automobiles. And so, yes, what have we been talking a lot about? Energy crunches and things of that nature, high natural gas, high coal, you name it, all across the EU. But yet they're continuing to march on as if, nope, no big deal with electric vehicles in the EU. So diesel and petrol cars are losing ground. We see that petrol cars down 9% year-over-year change, diesel down 8.5%, hybrid electric, plug-in electric, plug-in hybrid rather, battery electric, all up 8.8, 4.6, 3.5%. Various others mixed. So where is all this electricity going to come from exactly? Scratching my head here. It says in the first 9 months of 2021, registrations of petrol and diesel cars went down by 9 and 8.5%, respectively, when compared to the previous year's time frame, according to data by the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. Vehicles with a hybrid electric powertrain, on the other hand, saw a rise in registrations of 8.8%, putting their market share of cars registered between January and September of 2021 about 1% behind diesel units. Overall, the share of cars with alternative powertrains keep rising steadily, making up more than a third of newly registered automobiles in the EU in the first 3 quarters of this year. The shift towards electric cars with chargeable batteries is also not without its downside. Even though a study conducted by the Universities of Exeter, Cambridge, and Nijmegen has shown that the total average carbon emissions of an electric vehicle are still far lower than one of a powered by fossil fuels, even with production emissions factored in. There's still the issue of sourcing the minerals for batteries, their longevity, and the increased production of e-waste. Even though the automotive industry in the European Union continues to hit its target values for the reduction of average CO2 emissions, according to data from the ICCT, those numbers are to be taken with a grain of salt. Without phase-in provisions and extra credits for low-emission vehicles and eco-innovation technology, most big manufacturers like Ford, Volvo, BMW, and Volkswagen would miss the mark by a considerable margin. Out of the estimated 7 gigatons of CO2 emitted by the transport sector in 2020, passenger cars contributed 2.9 gigatons, or 40%. Perhaps I have a better idea. Rather than worrying about CO2 emissions, maybe we need to monitor the oxygenation levels, perhaps around politicians' houses. Just a thought. Maybe they're not getting enough O2 to their brains. All right, well, outside of some financial news, we get this out of Flag and Cross as Biden tries to explain driving cross-country in an electric car. And, of course, it goes horribly wrong. It says as gas prices soar across the country, Resident Joe Biden attempted to explain the benefits of electric cars. Predictably, his explanation was more confusing than it was helpful. Biden was giving a speech Thursday describing his 2 massive spending sprees, also known as the Build Back Better plan and infrastructure bill. According to a White House transcript, Biden was describing the need to replace buses and cars with electric alternatives, like rail and electric cars. When you buy an electric vehicle, you can go across America on a single tank of gas. Figuratively speaking, Biden said, it's not gas, you plug it in. Yeah, Joe, I don't think you quite get the concept here.
They not expend any pollution into the air. We'll build out the first ever national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations all across the country. So when you buy an electric vehicle, and you get credit for buying it, you buy an electric vehicle, you can go all the way across America on a single tank of gas, figuratively speaking. It's not gas. You plug it in. 500,000 of them. These stations along the way. We're going to get off the sidelines on manufacturing solar panels and wind farms and electric vehicles with targeted manufacturing credits. You manufacture, you get them a credit for doing it. These will help grow the supply chains in communities too.
Yeah, single tank of gas for an electric car. That's a head scratcher. Says Biden at least admitted his tank of gas analogy was figurative, so he apparently understands electric cars do not actually run on gas. That is where his knowledge of electric cars seems to end. Now, mind you, wasn't he the one that hopped behind a Ford F-150 that was electric powered here, and they let him drive around a course? I don't know, just a thought. Biden's suggestion that you can drive across the country in an electric car on the equivalent of one tank of gas is false, on multiple levels. First, electric cars have a shorter range than gas cars. The average electric car can travel 250 to 350 miles on a single charge. The U.S. UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies reported the 350-mile range is comparable to many gas cars, but UC Davis said only higher-end brands like Tesla have that range. To most logical people, the equivalent of one tank of gas would be a full charge in an electric vehicle. Considering the country is a lot longer than 350 miles, it would be impossible to travel across the country on one charge. Once the electric car does not one Once the electric car does run out of gas, recharging it is not nearly as simple as getting a tank of gas. UC Davis reported in a standard 120-volt outlet like the ones in a normal home. A fully electric car can take 20 or more hours to charge. Even with a 240-volt outlet, full charging takes 4 to 8 hours. Some vehicles are equipped for fast charging, meaning they can get an 80% charge in about 20 minutes. That is still significantly longer than a typical stop for gas. This is not to say that no one should buy an electric car, because they certainly have benefits. However, stopping for 20 minutes every 250 to 350 miles on a road trip is undoubtedly an inconvenience. When Biden says electric cars can go across the country in one figurative tank of gas, his comment is at best misleading and at worst completely ignorant. In reality, electric cars have to stop more often and for longer than gas cars. It's easy to see why Biden would want to start pushing electric cars. It's just in the last couple months, gas prices have skyrocketed at an alarming rate around the country. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of gas was $3.39 as of Thursday. That was an increase of more than 20 cents since the previous month, when the average was $3.18. On October 28, 2020, the average gallon of gas in the United States cost $2.15. In just 365 days, the average price has risen about $1.25 a gallon. Every time Americans go to the gas pump, price increases remind them of the current state of the country under Biden. He can lie about electric cars all he wants, but he cannot hide what's happening in the United States. So, yes, total buffoonery. Outside of that, more buffoonery. Let's talk about the Pope now. Out of Breitbart, Pope Francis, let there be no more borders or walls to hide behind. Gee, who does that sound like? Somebody like a George Soros with his open society? Who does a pope really serve? The great takeaway from the coronavirus scamdemic is a rejection of borders and walls, Pope Francis told the BBC on Friday morning. Climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic have exposed our deep vulnerability and raised numerous doubts and concerns about our economic systems and the way we organize societies, the Pope asserted in a special audio message for the launch of the COP26 conference. The most important lesson we can take away from these crises is our need to build together, so that there will no longer be any borders, barriers, or political walls for us to hide behind, he declared. Build back better, Pope? Francis said the pandemic and climate crisis have together taken away humanity's sense of security, making people feel powerless and lacking control over their lives. We find ourselves increasingly frail and even fearful, caught up and a succession of crises in the area of healthcare, the environment, food supplies, and the economy, to say of nothing of social, humanitarian, and ethical crises, he stated. These crises are all profoundly interconnected, he stated, and calls for the ability to formulate plans and put them rapidly into action, to rethink the future of the world, our common home, and to reassess our common purpose. Rethink our future. Sounds awful lot like a diatribe or trope from the World Economic Forum to reimagine, right? And there we have Pope Francis to celebrate Mass for migrants in the Vatican from July of this year. Says these crises also present us with the need to take radical decisions that are not always easy, he contended, while urging his hearers not to retreat into isolationism, protectionism, and exploitation. Speaking more directly about the environment and climate change, the pontiff cited a scientist who told him some time ago, if things continue as they are, in 50 years' time my baby granddaughter will have to live in an unlivable world. We cannot allow this to happen. It is essential that each of us be committed to this urgent change of direction, sustained by our own faith and spirituality, the Pope insisted. The political decision makers who will meet at COP26 in Glasgow are urgently summoned to provide effective responses to the present ecological crisis and, in this way, to offer concrete hope to future generations. Francis concluded while inviting everyone to offer a collective response to the unprecedented threat of climate change and the degradation of our common home. Concrete. Always like to throw that word concrete in there, don't they? I think we've learned a little bit about that term before in some of these folks, haven't we? So, yeah, the pontiff bowing to the worldly system, using a lot of the same verbiage as the Davos folks. The only thing that would have pretty well put the icing on the cake is if you would have just said, hey, let's build back better. And outside of that, Youngkin sees support from black Virginians. It's not a life set here. So obviously a pretty hotly contested race going on in Virginia. Says, will black Virginians defy expectations and turn out in increased numbers for Republicans' gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin? Says if they do, it could give Youngkin a winning edge. Dems are doing all they can to prevent that, including bringing out heavy guns to promote Dem candidate Terry McAuliffe. Says Dems are already cheating in Virginia. If this goes unchecked, election in America is dead.
Look, I'm all about fighting for the truth too, and sometimes, unfortunately, we can't always rely on the media. I wanted to go there. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to see it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. I know how Democrats are cheating, and that information has been given to the Youngkin campaign.
Well, they're going to try to do it in Fairfax County.
Absolutely.
You know,
I'm already getting reports today that people are going to vote, and they have never done a mail-in ballot ever. And yet when they went to cast their ballot, they were told, no, we've already mailed you a mail-in ballot. And so we're already looking into that.
That's why we told everybody in Virginia vote early, so that couldn't happen. The earlier you voted, they couldn't do it. Now they're starting to do it. But
look, I'm all about fighting for the truth too, and sometimes, unfortunately,
like
we can't always rely.
Yeah, where have we heard that before? Didn't we hear similar things playing out in a recall election in California? Seem to recall that very same thing playing out there, right? Where people walked in and said that, hey, we're here to cast our ballots. And of course, them being Republicans, they were turned away and says, no, you've already voted. Seems I've heard that somewhere before. Same playbook. FNC, a member of the Black Virginians for Glenn Youngkin Coalition, told Fox News why she believes members of her group are supporting the Republican candidate in Virginia's gubernatorial race. A Suffolk University poll released Tuesday shows the race for governor between Youngkin and opposing candidate Dem Terry McAuliffe remains very close. The poll showed the candidates tied at roughly 45% each, with 5% of voters remaining undecided. So yeah, if you can believe the polls, and of course we already know that they're planning to cheat, And of course, we've heard that even through 44's mouth in the past. So again, Virginians, I would caution you, keep your eyes on the polls, have your cameras at the ready, be prepared to file out the various affidavits that are going to be needed, and just be ready. So last but not least on the morning, interesting news out of North Korea. And Kim Jong-un loses 20 kilos, has no health issues, South Korea's spy agency says. And this seems to be kind of a knock-on effect from, I don't know, this has been several months ago that there was a lot of concern about Kim Jong-un and his rapid weight loss. And a lot of people were making a big stink about that, and they were really tightening screws down as to who could see the news about that. They're clamping down on that. So I'm not sure what's going on here, but North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has lost about 20 kilograms after weighing around 140 kilograms previously, but he appears to be in good health, according to South Korea's spy agency on Thursday. The briefing was given by the National Intelligence Service during a closed-door parliamentary session, denying rumors that the communist regime was using a stand-in for Kim during recent public appearances, according to Rep. Kim Byung-ki of the ruling Democratic Party. According to the Yonhap News Agency, the NIS made the assessment after conducting a detailed study of the North Korean leader's health using artificial intelligence and other scientific methods. Kim's health has been a frequent source of speculation due to the political ramifications of his inability to perform his duties. There has been no known appointment of a successor. North Korea may have reprocessed spent nuclear fuel rods at its main nuclear complex in Yongbyon from February to July, according to the NIS. The North can obtain weapons-grade plutonium by reprocessing spent fuel rods. According to the agency, Kim has also removed portraits of his father and grandfather, former leaders Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, from the backdrops of official meetings. So, is this much to do about nothing? To be determined, I'm sure. But interesting nonetheless. Again, that this seems to be recycling itself back through. And as the article out of Insider Paper mentions, that they had raised this question some time ago. And again, one might wonder whether or not Kim Jong-un is indeed Kim Jong-un, or if they have managed to find a stunt double, right? All right, well, that is going to do it for the broadcast here this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in here on this now 29th day of October. And that being said, we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. Take care, and God bless.